Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right section? The question hung in the recycled air of United Atlantic Flight 892's first-class cabin, delivered with the kind of practiced politeness that barely concealed suspicion. Flight attendant Rachel Palmer stood at row 2, her blonde hair pulled into regulation-compliance blue eyes, scanning the woman who'd just settled into seat 2A. Dr. Simone Mitchell looked up from tucking her medical journal into the seat pocket. The familiar burn started in her chest. Not anger exactly, but recognition. She'd felt this same tightness during her residency, when attending physicians assumed she was a nurse during medical conferences, when colleagues directed technical questions to the man standing next to her. "I'm in 2A," she replied, her voice carrying the measured calm she'd perfected through years of proving herself in operating rooms. She wore a burgundy cashmere sweater and dark jeans, comfortable for the 6-hour flight. Unremarkable except for the platinum wedding band that caught the cabin light. Rachel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. 3 years of flight service had taught her to read passengers, and this one didn't fit her mental checklist. No designer labels, no obvious jewelry, no frequent flyer acknowledgement on her tablet. Rachel had seen upgraded passengers before they usually made a point of establishing their status, mentioning their companies or connections. Of course, just making sure everyone's comfortable. The words came out automatically, but Rachel's attention had already shifted to the businessman in 1B, her demeanor brightening noticeably. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison. Flying to Miami for business again." From seat 4C. Elena Rodriguez held her phone steady, pretending to review travel notes, while her camera captured the interaction. The 29-year-old travel blogger had built a following by documenting real experiences, including the uncomfortable moments most people ignored. Something about this exchange made her storytelling instincts prickle. "Hey everyone," she whispered to her phone, keeping the camera discreet. "Elena here on Flight 892 to Miami. Already noticing some interesting crew dynamics. Stay with me." Dr. James Park glanced up from his laptop in seat 1A. The University of Washington business professor specialized in organizational behavior, and he just witnessed a textbook example of service differentiation. The flight attendant's body language, tone variation, and eye contact patterns all pointed to unconscious bias in action. He opened a new document, In-Flight Service Observation, UA 892. His wife would tease him about turning everything into research, but these real-world examples were invaluable for understanding how bias manifested in professional settings. Sarah Chen, reviewing contracts on her tablet in seat 5A, caught the interaction peripherally. The corporate attorney's legal instincts recognized patterns that could become problematic differential treatment, assumption-based service, potential documentation needs. She discreetly activated her phone's recording app, a habit from years of depositions. The cabin settled into pre-flight routines, but tension lingered. Mike Thompson, airline industry analyst in seat 3B, noticed the service inconsistency while reviewing quarterly reports. His experience tracking customer satisfaction metrics made him sensitive to crew behavior patterns that could generate complaints. Rachel completed her initial rounds, her discomfort with 2A growing instead of fading. The passenger was reading quietly, occasionally making notes. Focused, intelligent behavior that somehow made Rachel more suspicious rather than less. Difficult passengers usually announced themselves with demands or complaints. This woman's composure felt threatening in a way Rachel couldn't articulate. During her break, she scrolled through the passenger manifest. Dr. S. Mitchell. The title gave her pause momentarily, but doctors flew coach all the time. Medical residents, small-town physicians, the title didn't guarantee wealth. No frequent flyer status, no special meal requests, no upgrade history. Supervisor Janet Cross emerged from the cockpit, her silver hair styled in the severe bob that matched her 22-year approach to passenger management. Everything running smoothly. Mostly. Rachel replied, lowering her voice. I'm keeping an eye on 2A. She seems unfamiliar with the service level. Janet nodded with the understanding of someone who dealt with passengers who didn't grasp first-class expectations. Document anything unusual. Full flight means we can't have disruptions. Simone Mitchell tried to focus on her journal notes about a complex aneurysm repair scheduled for Monday, but her mind kept drifting to the phone call she'd ended before boarding. Marcus had sounded stressed, juggling back-to-back investor meetings while managing the quarterly earnings announcement for Mitchell Technologies. She hadn't mentioned the check-in agent's confusion when she'd presented her first-class boarding pass, the subtle double-take the request to verify her identity. After 15 years of marriage to one of the tech industry's most successful executives, she'd learned to shield him from every slight. He carried enough weight running a company that employed thousands. The irony wasn't lost on her. As Seattle's leading neurosurgeon, she'd saved CEOs' lives, operated on tech moguls' children, been featured on magazine covers. But wearing comfortable clothes on an airplane transformed her into someone suspicious out of place. Elena's follower count was climbing as her audience sensed developing drama. Her comment section showed familiar patterns. Something's definitely off with that flight attendant, Elena, about to expose some airline drama. Keep filming. Dr. Park observed the cabin dynamics with growing academic interest. The differential treatment was subtle, but systematic. Unconscious bias, made visible through professional interactions. He'd published papers on similar patterns in hospitality, but airline examples were harder to document due to the closed environment. Sarah Chen recognized potential legal vulnerabilities developing. Airlines faced particular exposure to bias litigation due to federal oversight and public visibility. The recorded interactions could become evidence if patterns continued. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Flight attendants prepare for departure. Rachel Palmer straightened her uniform, but her focus remained on seat 2A. The passenger's quiet confidence and focused reading suggested education and intelligence details that contradicted, rather than confirmed, Rachel's initial assessment. Instead of self-correction, this cognitive dissonance manifested as increased suspicion. She decided drink service would provide an opportunity to test her instincts. 45 minutes after takeoff, as the Boeing 777 leveled over the Cascade Mountains, drink service began, with military precision, at least for most passengers. Rachel Palmer wheeled her cart down the narrow aisle, her professional smile genuine, for familiar faces in rows 1 and 3, visibly dimming as she approached row 2. She'd spent the climb, convincing herself that her concerns about 2A were justified. Real first-class passengers engaged differently. They made conversation, established connections, demonstrated their comfort with premium service through subtle social cues. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison," she said warmly to the businessman in 1B. "Your usual scotch." "You read my mind, Rachel," he replied with the easy familiarity of platinum status. Elena Rodriguez adjusted her phone angle, capturing the warm interaction while pretending to organize her travel documents. Her audience had grown to 400 live viewers, drawn by her promise of interesting flight dynamics. When Rachel reached row 2, her demeanor shifted not dramatically, but noticeably to anyone paying attention. The smile became professional rather than warm, the eye contact brief rather than engaged. Beverage service. The words emerged flat, correct but cold. Simone looked up from reviewing surgical notes. "Orange juice would be nice." "Thank you. Orange juice." Rachel's repetition carried subtle surprise, as if the request were somehow unexpected for this passenger. "Let me check what we have available." The phrasing was carefully ambiguous. Not certainly or coming right up, but conditional availability that implied potential limitations. Dr. Park noted the language pattern, typing quietly on his laptop. Rachel retrieved a plastic cup from the lower shelf of her cart, distinctly different from the crystal glasses she'd offered other passengers. She filled it halfway with orange juice, handling the container with visible reluctance. "Here you are," she said, placing the cup on Simone's tray table with slightly excessive force. A few drops splashed over the rim. "Thank you." Simone's voice remained steady, but she noticed the difference immediately. The businessman had received warmed nuts, with his scotch served on a small plate with cloth napkin. The elderly couple had been offered champagne alternatives. She received grudging orange juice in plastic. Elena's comment section was heating up. "Y'all see that service difference? Same flight, different worlds. This attendant has issues," Mike Thompson observed with growing concern. Service inconsistency was the fastest route to reputation damage in his industry analysis. A single passenger's social media complaint could cost airlines millions in bookings. He leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me, could I get orange juice as well?" Rachel's demeanor immediately brightened. "Of course, sir, fresh squeezed or pulp-free. We have both." The contrast was stark. Mike received options: enthusiasm, crystal glass, and embossed napkin. Identical beverage, completely different experience. Dr. Park's fingers moved rapidly across his keyboard, documenting the differential treatment with academic precision. Sarah Chen had abandoned her contract review legal training, recognizing hostile environment creation in progress. Simone sipped her orange juice and returned to her medical notes, but remained peripherally aware. She'd experienced variations throughout her career assumptions about her role in operating rooms. Surprise when she introduced herself as Department Chief, constant requirements to prove competence that white colleagues never faced. But airline bias felt different. In hospitals, expertise eventually established authority through results. On airplanes, she was trapped at 30,000 feet with limited recourse. Rachel Palmer felt validated by what she interpreted as passive acceptance. Real first-class travelers would have complained about the plastic cup or demanded better service. The woman's lack of protest confirmed Rachel's assessment. She wasn't accustomed to premium treatment because she didn't belong here. This conclusion would prove catastrophic. As Rachel continued service rounds with varying warmth based on passenger assessments, cabin tension increased. Elena's viewer count climbed past 800. Dr. Park's documentation expanded beyond academic interest. Sarah Chen's legal instincts shifted from observation to preparation. Ma'am, Rachel said, returning to row 2 after completing her rounds. "I noticed you didn't finish your orange juice. Was something wrong with it?" The question implied criticism that Simone was wasteful, ungrateful, or making unreasonable judgments about adequate service. "It was fine," Simone replied calmly. "I don't usually drink quickly during flights." "Of course," Rachel's tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that some passengers have expectations that don't always match what we can provide in this environment." The statement was precisely constructed, not technically discriminatory, but clearly implying that Simone's expectations were inappropriate for her circumstances. Verbal redlining through policy language that appeared neutral while targeting specific groups. Elena's live audience noticed the coded language immediately. "This flight attendant is being racist in real time. Document everything. That's discrimination disguised as policy." Dr. Park looked up from his laptop, academic restraint finally breaking. "Excuse me, but I've been observing service patterns, and there seem to be some inconsistencies in passenger treatment." Rachel's head snapped toward him, professional mask slipping. "Sir, I provide appropriate service based on individual passenger behavior. If you have concerns, I can get my supervisor." "That might be helpful," Dr. Park replied quietly. The professor had escalated from observation to intervention. Elena's live stream hit 1,200 viewers. Sarah Chen texted her law firm's senior partner, potential discrimination case, developing on UA 892. Documenting. Mike Thompson opened his laptop and began emailing United's corporate contacts, hoping to provide early crisis warning. Rachel Palmer, however, interpreted the growing passenger attention as validation of her concerns about 2A. The woman was clearly causing disruption, exactly the problem Rachel had anticipated. She reached for her call button to summon Janet Cross. Janet Cross emerged from the galley with the measured authority of 2 decades managing airline operations. Her silver hair and no-nonsense demeanor suggested competence earned through handling everything from medical emergencies to celebrity meltdowns. "I understand there's been some concern about service consistency," she said, her voice carrying institutional weight. Rachel stood behind her supervisor, vindication written across her features. "I called Janet because there seem to be unrealistic expectations about our service standards, and it's affecting other passengers." Elena Rodriguez's live stream had reached 1,500 viewers, with comments flowing faster than she could process. "This is discrimination happening live. Document everything. Call the news." Dr. Park saved his notes and looked up. "The concern is about differential treatment that appears to correlate with racial profiling." Janet's expression hardened. Passengers who used terms like racial profiling were typically troublemakers seeking special treatment or compensation. "Sir, my crew provides professional service to all passengers. Any misunderstandings can be resolved quietly." Sarah Chen leaned forward, ensuring her voice recorder captured everything. As a discrimination attorney, she recognized deflection tactics: deny, minimize, isolate, contain. "There's been no misunderstanding," Simone said calmly, entering the conversation directly. "Your crew member served me orange juice in plastic while offering other passengers crystal glasses and premium options. The differential treatment has been consistent." Janet assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. The passenger was articulate, composed, making specific allegations that could become problematic. But Janet had managed similar complaints before. Establish authority, document difficult passenger behavior. Create supportive paper trail. "Ma'am, we provide appropriate service based on individual circumstances and safety protocols. If you received a plastic cup, there were specific reasons." The lie was smooth and unfalsifiable. Who could prove there weren't safety reasons applying to one passenger? Mike Thompson's industry expertise made him aware of mounting legal and financial liability. United's stock could drop significantly if this incident went viral. He'd seen discrimination videos cost airlines hundreds of millions. Elena's viewer count climbed past 2,000, with her video spreading across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. UA892 and flight bias were beginning to trend. "I'd like to see the safety protocol requiring orange juice in plastic cups for certain passengers," Simone said with surgical precision, cutting through bureaucratic double talk. Janet felt control slipping. The passenger was too composed, too articulate, too specific. Difficult passengers usually became emotional or made vague accusations. This woman was systematically dismantling defensive positions. "Ma'am, I don't need to justify safety protocols to passengers. What I need is for you to stop creating disruption." The accusation of disruption was particularly insidious. Simone had spoken in measured professional tones throughout, but Janet was establishing a narrative of problematic behavior. Sarah Chen had heard enough. "I'm an attorney documenting this interaction. The passenger hasn't raised her voice, made unreasonable demands, or created disruption. Your crew has provided demonstrably different service and is now victim blaming." The word attorney changed the cabin's energy immediately. Janet felt familiar tightness, the sensation when turbulence warnings came through. Legal involvement transformed passenger complaints from manageable service issues into career-threatening liabilities. "Ma'am, if you're not directly involved, please remain seated and allow us to handle this appropriately," Elena whispered to her live stream. A lawyer just joined the conversation. "This supervisor is in trouble. We're almost at 3,000 viewers." Rachel Palmer sensed shifting dynamics but doubled down. "Janet, She's been problematic since boarding. She doesn't seem familiar with first-class service, and now other passengers are getting involved. The coded language was expertly deployed. Unfamiliar with service meant doesn't belong here while getting involved. Blame the victim for discrimination she was experiencing. Dr. Park looked up from documentation. I've been taking extensive notes for research purposes. The differential treatment has been obvious and well documented. Mike Thompson made a prescient decision emailing United's crisis team, UA 892CMIA, experiencing bias incident with viral potential. Multiple passengers documenting. Recommend immediate intervention. Simone remained outwardly calm while calculating internally. As a surgeon, she understood battles requiring patience, strategy, and precise timing. She had options these crew members couldn't imagine, but timing would determine their effectiveness. I need to make a phone call, she said quietly. Janet felt genuine concern. Passengers requesting calls during service disputes usually had connections, corporate status, legal representation, or authority that could escalate complaints beyond crew management. Ma'am, we're at cruising altitude. Non-emergency calls should wait until after service completion. This concerns business operations affecting multiple parties, Simone replied with precision, suggesting high-stakes negotiation experience. Elena's viewers climbed past 4,000, with content being shared by travel influencers and civil rights organizations. The incident was approaching viral threshold. The cabin had become a pressure cooker, with passengers choosing sides and crew digging deeper into indefensible positions. Janet Cross made the career-ending decision. Ma'am, you need to remain quiet and stop disrupting other passengers, or we'll discuss alternative seating arrangements. The threat was clear: comply or face humiliation through economy relocation. It worked on passengers without resources or connections. But Dr. Simone Mitchell wasn't just any passenger. She reached for her phone with surgical calm. The next minutes would transform not just the flight, but the entire industry. Let me stop you right there, Janet Cross said, stepping closer to row 2 with the authority of 2 decades managing passenger conflicts. I've been flying for 22 years, and I recognize disruptive behavior patterns developing. Her voice carried institutional weight as she positioned herself for visual dominance over the seated passenger. You've complained about service involved other passengers, and now you're demanding phone privileges that violate communication policies. Elena Rodriguez held her phone steady, capturing both Janet and Simone in frame. Her live stream had reached 5,200 viewers, with comments streaming faster than comprehension. This is insane. Flight attendant power trip. Document everything. Dr. James Park looked up from his laptop documentation. As someone who studies organizational behavior professionally, I need to point out that your crew has demonstrated differential treatment patterns that correlate with racial bias. Janet's eyes snapped to the professor with intensity, reserved for passengers who challenged crew authority. Sir, unless you're federal law enforcement, you have no authority to evaluate our procedures. Remain seated, and let us handle passenger relations. Rachel Palmer stood behind her supervisor, feeling validated by Janet's strong response. I told you something was off about 2A from the start. She's been creating problems since boarding. Sarah Chen, still recording everything, recognized escalation patterns from her discrimination cases. Her legal training identified the moment when passenger complaints became viral, content costing airlines millions. Mike Thompson frantically messaged United's corporate headquarters. His crisis analysis experience told him this situation was approaching the point of no return, when passenger disputes became social media disasters, requiring executive intervention. I still need to make that phone call, Simone said with hospital crisis calm. It regards business operations directly affecting this airline. Janet felt control slipping, but couldn't retreat without undermining authority. Passengers who insisted on calls usually had connections beyond normal crew management, but backing down would validate complaints and expose her to disciplinary action. Federal regulations restrict non-emergency communication during flight operations. Your business concerns can wait until arrival. The statement was false. FAA rules restricted calls during takeoff and landing. Not cruising, but sounded official enough to justify Janet's position. Dr. Park's organizational expertise made him recognize authority establishment tactics. Actually, regulations specifically allow business calls during cruising altitude. Restrictions apply to cellular interference with navigation, not passenger communications. Janet's jaw tightened. Passengers who corrected crew on regulations were particularly threatening because they suggested knowledge undermining authority structures. "Sir, I'm asking you one final time to stop interfering with crew operations," Elena whispered to her audience. 800 viewers now, and this supervisor is digging deeper. The professor knows aviation law better than the crew. Her comment section exploded with outrage and disbelief at the crew's behavior. Simone Mitchell assessed the situation with surgical precision. She'd faced hostile environments throughout her career: operating rooms, where senior surgeons questioned her competence, hospital boards, dismissing her recommendations, conferences where expertise was assumed to belong elsewhere. But airline bias was different. In hospitals, competence eventually established authority through life-saving results. On airplanes, she was trapped with crew members holding significant power over passenger safety and comfort. She reached for her phone, causing Janet to step forward aggressively. "I explained that phone calls are restricted. Put that device away immediately. I'm calling about Mitchell Technologies' contracts with United Airlines," Simone said calmly, her words precise as scalpel cuts. These contracts include passenger treatment standards relevant to this situation. The company name hit Mike Thompson like physical impact. Mitchell Technologies was among the world's largest airline technology suppliers: entertainment platforms, booking systems, maintenance, software, crew scheduling. Their contracts with major airlines represented billions in annual revenue. He stared at the passenger in 2A with new recognition. The calm composure, precise language insistence on business calls. This wasn't just any passenger complaining about service. Janet heard the company name, but missed the implications. Her focus remained on maintaining crew authority and managing what she perceived as difficult passenger behavior. Regardless of business affiliations, you must comply with crew instructions regarding device usage. Rachel Palmer felt increasingly vindicated by her supervisor's firm stance. The passenger was clearly trying to intimidate crew with corporate name-dropping and implied connections. "She's been problematic from boarding, Janet. We should document this for the arrival report." Elena's audience had grown to over 8,000 viewers, with major travel influencers beginning to share her content. The incident was rapidly approaching traditional media pickup threshold. Dr. Park saved his documentation and addressed Janet directly. "As an academic researcher, I'm obligated to inform you that multiple passengers are recording this interaction for potential discrimination studies and legal proceedings. Continued escalation creates significant liability for United." The word "legal" caused Janet's stomach to tighten, but she'd committed too far to retreat. Admitting error would validate all passenger complaints and potentially create grounds for formal disciplinary action. Recording crew interactions without permission violates airline policy. All passengers must stop filming immediately. Sarah Chen looked up from her legal notes. Federal transportation law allows passengers to record interactions with airline personnel in public aircraft areas. Preventing such recording could constitute intimidation under civil rights statutes. The cabin atmosphere grew electric. Passengers in nearby rows stopped activities to listen. The elderly couple whispered nervously. The businessman pretended to work while clearly monitoring every word. Elena addressed her live stream. Over 9,000 viewers watching this unfold. The crew is threatening passengers who document their behavior. This is absolutely unprecedented. Mike Thompson made a decision that would later prevent complete corporate catastrophe. He stood and approached Janet with bomb defusal caution. "Ma'am, I'm Mike Thompson, senior analyst with Morrison Investment Group. We handle United's performance metrics and customer satisfaction. I think there might be misunderstandings here that could be resolved before they become larger issues." Janet recognized corporate authority tone and felt momentary uncertainty. Industry analysts influenced airline ratings and investment recommendations. Their reports affected stock prices and executive bonuses. "Sir, we have established protocols for passenger disputes." Mike glanced at Simone, then back at Janet. "Ma'am, you might want to reconsider your approach." Mitchell Technologies is United's primary supplier for in-flight entertainment booking platforms and maintenance software. Their contracts represent significant portions of United's technology budget. The information hit Janet like unexpected turbulence. Mitchell Technologies. She'd heard the name in crew briefings about system updates and service protocols. If this passenger was connected to that company, complaints could escalate far beyond normal crew procedures. But Rachel Palmer, still focused on her initial assessment, dismissed Mike's warning. "She doesn't look like a technology executive. She's probably name-dropping to intimidate us." The statement would later become evidence in United's bias training reform programs. Elena's viewer count hit 11,000. Screenshots were spreading across social platforms with captions like, "Flight attendant says, black passenger, doesn't look like tech executive." Simone Mitchell looked at her phone screen where missed calls and messages had accumulated during the confrontation. Messages from Marcus from Mitchell Technologies' legal team, from communications specialists, monitoring social media for company mentions. She selected Marcus's number and pressed call. Janet Cross lunged forward. "I specifically prohibited phone calls. End that call immediately or we'll take additional action." The threat hung in recycled air like toxic cloud. Additional action could mean forced relocation to emergency landing for passenger removal. Janet was escalating beyond normal dispute resolution into territory requiring federal intervention and permanent legal documentation. "Dr." Park typed rapidly. "Crew now threatening passenger with removal for business phone call. Escalation suggests institutional rather than individual bias." Sarah Chen stood legal training demanding intervention. "As an attorney, I need to inform everyone that threatening passengers with removal for exercising legitimate communication rights could constitute civil rights violations under federal transportation law." The cabin had become a courtroom at cruising altitude, with passengers witnessing bias that would ultimately cost careers, trigger federal investigations, and transform industry protocols. But Simone's call was already connecting, and the voice that answered would change everything. Mitchell Technologies, CEO office, Jonathan speaking. The words carried clearly through the cabin, audible to nearby passengers. Elena's live stream audience heard them distinctly. Dr. Park's documentation captured them for posterity. Janet Cross felt the first flutter of genuine panic. The cabin fell silent, except for engine noise, and Elena's whispered commentary. Jonathan's voice, crisp and professional, carried corporate authority, impossible to ignore. "Dr. Mitchell, I have several messages requiring your attention. Are you available to discuss the Miami conference logistics and tomorrow's board presentation?" Janet Cross felt her stomach drop. Dr. Mitchell, not just a passenger with complaints, but someone whose calls were handled by CEO offices. The implications began cascading through her mind. Rachel Palmer, clinging to her initial assessment, whispered urgently. She could be using some corporate answering service to fake connections. People try this constantly. But Mike Thompson was rapidly connecting dots, spelling disaster for United. Mitchell Technologies' CEO office meant direct access to the company providing critical airline systems. If this passenger was genuinely connected to that corporate level, her complaints could trigger contract reviews worth billions. Elena whispered to her live stream audience, 12,000 people are watching this escalate. The CEO office just called her Dr. Mitchell. Comments exploded. She's a doctor. These flight attendants are about to lose everything. This is better than any TV show. Dr. Park looked up from his documentation. His academic brain processed the bias patterns he'd witnessed, how crew members dismissed passenger credentials based solely on appearance, escalated conflict, rather than de-escalating, ignored multiple warnings about legal and professional implications. Jonathan, I'm on United Airlines Flight 892, and there's been a situation involving discriminatory treatment by crew members, Simone said calmly into her phone. I may need to discuss contractual obligations regarding passenger treatment standards. The words hit the cabin like sonic boom. Contractual obligations meant legal consequences. Passenger treatment standards meant corporate policies subject to violation. The casual mention suggested familiarity with high-level business operations. Sarah Chen recognized strategic communication patterns. Simone was establishing legal record while demonstrating corporate connections that would make discriminatory treatment extremely expensive for United. Janet stepped forward desperately. Ma'am, you need to end that call. We have policies about disrupting operations with personal business. This call regards business operations directly affecting this airline. Simone replied without looking up. Jonathan, could you pull up United Airlines service contracts with Mitchell Technologies? I believe there are passenger treatment clauses that might be relevant. Mike Thompson was frantically typing to United's crisis team. Emergency. UA 892 crew discriminating against passenger connected to Mitchell Tech CEO office. Viral live stream in progress. Contract implications? Massive. Jonathan's voice came through clearly. Dr. Mitchell, I'm accessing the United contracts now. The primary technology agreement includes Section 12 regarding passenger experience standards and non-discrimination clauses. Should I forward relevant sections to Legal Elena's live stream, reached 15,000 viewers, with content spreading across every major platform. Travel influencers, civil rights organizations, and news aggregators were amplifying screenshots and clips. #UA892. Discrimination was trending nationally. Rachel Palmer felt reality shifting beneath her feet, but remained committed to her assessment. Janet, she's trying to intimidate us with fake corporate connections. We can't let passengers manipulate us. The statement would later be used in sensitivity training as an example of bias persistence despite overwhelming contradictory evidence. Dr. Park saved his documentation and addressed Janet directly. As someone studying organizational behavior, I need to point out that your crew's continued escalation despite obvious warning signs suggests training failures rather than individual judgment errors. Janet's hands began shaking slightly. 22 years hadn't prepared her for passengers with direct connections to airline suppliers. Her training covered drunk celebrities and medical emergencies, not potential corporate executives who could trigger contract reviews. Ma'am, regardless of business connections, you must comply with crew authority during flight operations. Simone looked up from her phone for the first time since calling. Jonathan, did you hear that? The crew insists passenger compliance with discriminatory treatment is required regardless of contractual obligations. Jonathan's response carried legal implications. Dr. Mitchell, I'm documenting this conversation for corporate compliance. Should I initiate standard protocol for contractor discrimination incidents? The phrase standard protocol suggested Mitchell Technologies had established procedures for handling discrimination by business partners. Procedures implying significant consequences for companies violating passenger treatment standards. Sarah Chen stood legal instincts demanding intervention. As an attorney, I need to inform all parties that this conversation is creating documented legal record that could be used in federal discrimination proceedings. Elena addressed her live stream audience, now over 18,000 viewers. This has evolved from flight discrimination to potential corporate contract violation. A technology company working with airlines is documenting discriminatory treatment of their executive. The cabin atmosphere had become electric. Economy passengers were standing to look toward first class, drawn by unusual activity and Elena's increasingly excited commentary. Mike Thompson called United's emergency hotline directly. "This is Mike Thompson, Morrison Investment Group, regarding United Flight 892 Seattle to Miami. You have a developing crisis involving discrimination against a Mitchell Technologies executive that's going viral. I repeat, Mitchell Technologies executive experiencing discrimination on UA 892. Janet heard fragments of Mike's call and felt panic rising. Corporate hotlines meant executive attention. Crisis situations meant career-threatening investigations. The passenger she'd tried to manage as a service dispute had somehow become a corporate emergency center. But she'd committed too far to retreat. Admitting error would validate all complaints and potentially expose her to disciplinary action for unnecessary escalation. Dr. Mitchell, I'm asking you one final time to end your call and comply with crew instructions, or we'll consider alternative solutions. The threat was clear: comply, or face forced removal, possibly requiring emergency landing that would cost United hundreds of thousands and create permanent legal documentation. Simone looked directly at Janet with the calm intensity she used explaining complex procedures to families. Jonathan, the crew, is now threatening me with removal from the aircraft for making a business call to discuss contractual violations. Are you recording this? Every word, Dr. Mitchell. Our legal team is joining the call now. A new voice came through the phone speaker, crisp with professional authority. This is Amanda Richardson, General Counsel for Mitchell Technologies. Am I correct that United Airlines crew members are threatening Dr. Mitchell's removal for discussing potential contract violations with our office? Elena's viewer count hit 22,000. Her content was being shared by major news outlets, civil rights organizations, and industry publications. Screenshots were spreading across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, with captions that would define United's public image. Dr. Park looked up from comprehensive transcription. This has escalated from service discrimination to documented civil rights violations with corporate contract implications. Continued crew escalation despite obvious legal and business consequences suggests institutional training failures. Janet felt the situation spinning completely beyond control. What began as routine passenger management had become a conference call with corporate attorneys, while thousands watched via live stream. Rachel Palmer remained committed, despite overwhelming evidence. They're trying to intimidate us with lawyers and corporate connections, but we have to maintain crew authority. If we back down, every passenger will think they can manipulate us. The statement demonstrated institutional bias that would trigger federal investigations and congressional hearings. Amanda Richardson's voice carried legal precision. I'm documenting threats against Dr. Mitchell for contract compliance review. United's technology agreements include specific passenger treatment clauses that appear violated by this incident. Sarah Chen addressed the crew. As a practicing attorney, I need to inform you that continuing this escalation could result in federal civil rights charges, contract violation penalties, and personal liability for crew members. Mike Thompson received callback from United's crisis team. Mike, we're tracking social media mentions. This is approaching viral threshold. Can you provide ground assessment? He looked around the cabin passengers, recording on multiple phones. A live stream with over 22,000 viewers. Corporate attorneys joining calls. Crew members still escalating despite obvious warning signs. "You need highest-level intervention immediately," he told crisis management. "This will be front-page news tonight if it continues." But Janet Cross, trapped by authority structure and unable to admit error, made the decision that would cost her career and trigger industry-wide changes. Dr. Mitchell. "I'm contacting the captain about emergency landing options for passenger removal." The threat hung like a nuclear weapon. Emergency landings cost massive money, created permanent FAA documentation, and generated media attention, destroying corporate reputations. Simone Mitchell looked at her phone, where corporate attorneys documented every word, then at Elena's live stream broadcasting to tens of thousands, then at passengers witnessing bias in real time. She made a decision that would transform the airline industry forever. "Jonathan, please connect me directly to Marcus." The name meant nothing to Janet or Rachel, but Mike Thompson felt his blood turn to ice. Marcus Mitchell, CEO and founder of Mitchell Technologies, one of aerospace's most powerful executives, a man whose personal wealth exceeded several major airlines' market capitalization. Elena whispered to her audience, "She's calling someone named Marcus. We're at 25,000 viewers, and I think we're about to witness something incredible." The phone rang twice, then connected. "Hey, sweetheart. How's the flight?" The voice was warm, familiar, carrying casual authority of someone making billion-dollar decisions daily. Janet Cross felt her final foundation crumble. The cabin fell into absolute silence, except for engine hum and Elena's barely audible commentary. Marcus Mitchell's voice carried through Simone's phone. With relaxed warmth, completely unaware, his casual greeting was about to trigger United Airlines' largest corporate crisis in decades. "Marcus, I'm on speaker," Simone said calmly. "I'm calling from United Flight 892, and we need to discuss some contractual issues that have developed." Brief pause as Marcus processed the unusual phrasing. After 15 years of marriage, he recognized Simone's professional tone, the precise language she used explaining complex procedures to families or discussing critical cases with hospital administrators. Contractual issues. "Simone, what's happening? Are you okay?" Elena's live stream had reached 28,000 viewers' content, spreading simultaneously across every major platform. News outlets were monitoring developments, and industry publications tracked the story in real time. Janet Cross stood frozen, her 22 years of experience, providing no framework for passengers whose personal calls connected directly to CEO offices of major airline suppliers. Dr. Park looked up from documentation where he'd captured every detail of the confrontation. His academic brain processed how appearance-based assumptions had led crew members to escalate conflict with someone whose business connections could destroy their employer's financial stability. "I'm fine physically," Simone replied, "but there's been discriminatory treatment by crew members that may violate passenger treatment standards in our United contracts." The word "our" hit Mike Thompson like physical blow. Not their contracts, but our contracts, suggesting direct ownership or control of business relationships between Mitchell Technologies and United Airlines. Marcus's voice sharpened immediately, losing casual warmth and taking on the edge his competitors had learned to fear. "Discriminatory treatment. Are you telling me United crew members are discriminating against my wife?" "Rachel Palmer?" whispered desperately to Janet. "It's probably impersonation. People fake corporate connections for special treatment all the time." But Sarah Chen recognized authentic executive authority in crisis mode. Her discrimination case experience taught her to identify moments when corporate leaders realized their companies faced massive liability exposure. Elena addressed her live stream audience, now over 30,000 viewers. This woman's husband sounds like he owns half the airline industry. Comments move too fast to read. Her husband is the CEO. These flight attendants are finished. Corporate justice incoming. Marcus, the crew poured orange juice on me, deliberately demanded payment for cleaning fees, threatened me with aircraft removal, and are discussing emergency landings because I made a business call about contract violations. Each detail hit Marcus like ammunition rounds. Deliberately poured juice meant assault. Cleaning fee demands meant financial intimidation. Removal threats meant imprisonment at 30,000 feet. Emergency landing discussions meant his wife was being treated as security threat by employees of a company dependent on Mitchell Technologies for critical systems. Put me on speaker so everyone can hear clearly. Simone adjusted phone settings, and Marcus's voice filled first-class cabin with authority of someone employing 40,000 people worldwide and controlling technology contracts worth billions annually. This is Marcus Mitchell, CEO and founder of Mitchell Technologies. I want every person in that cabin to understand something. United Airlines depends on my company for in-flight entertainment systems, booking platforms, maintenance software, crew, scheduling applications, and passenger data management. Janet Cross felt her knees weaken. She'd heard Marcus Mitchell's name in corporate communications about system updates and technology partnerships, but never connected it to the passenger in 2A. Mike Thompson frantically calculated financial implications. Mitchell Technologies' contracts with United represented approximately 12% of the airline's technology budget. Loss of those contracts would cripple operations and cost thousands of jobs. Dr. Park saved documentation and looked directly at crew members. This is now documented corporate discrimination against a major supplier's family member. Legal and business implications are unprecedented. Marcus continued with calm precision of someone delivering terminal diagnosis. United's entertainment systems on 847 aircraft are Mitchell Technologies platforms. Your booking system processes 2.1 million reservations monthly through our software. Maintenance tracking prevents aircraft groundings through our applications. Elena whispered to livestream 32,000 viewers watching the most expensive discrimination case in aviation history. This man literally owns the technology running United Airlines. Rachel Palmer still clung to initial assessment despite overwhelming evidence. He could be anyone making claims about corporate connections. We can't let passengers intimidate us with fake authority. The statement would later be used in congressional hearings as evidence of institutional bias training failures throughout the airline industry. Marcus's voice turned deadly quiet. The tone competitors learned meant corporate warfare beginning. Jonathan, are you still on the line? Yes, sir, Mr. Mitchell. I've been documenting everything with our legal team. Pull up United Airlines technology service contracts immediately. I want specific clauses about passenger treatment standards and discrimination violations. Amanda Richardson's voice joined the conference. Mr. Mitchell, this is Amanda from legal. United's contracts include Section 15B regarding passenger experience standards and Section 23A covering non-discrimination requirements for family members of technology suppliers. Sarah Chen recognized legal framework being established in real time. Mitchell Technologies wasn't just a supplier. They were a supplier with contractual protections, making discrimination against family members breach of business agreements worth billions. Janet stepped forward desperately. Sir, there may have been misunderstandings about service standards, but we can resolve this through normal customer service channels. Marcus's response was swift and final. There are no misunderstandings. My wife was discriminated against by your crew based on racial profiling. This is documented by multiple passengers, recorded on live stream, and witnessed by thousands in real time. Elena's viewer count reached 35,000, with major news outlets beginning to report the developing story. Screenshots and video clips spread across social media with captions like, "Tech CEO's wife discriminated against on airline that uses his technology." Mike Thompson received another call from United's crisis team. "Mike, we're monitoring social media. This is approaching viral threshold with massive financial implications. What's current status?" He looked around the cabin, passengers recording on multiple devices. Live stream, with over 35,000 viewers. Corporate attorneys, documenting contract violations. Crew members who'd just discovered they'd been discriminating against the wife of their employer's most critical technology supplier. "You need the CEO on this call immediately," he told crisis management. "This will cost hundreds of millions if not handled perfectly in the next minutes." Marcus continued building his case with precision that made Mitchell Technologies a global leader. "Amanda, what are contractual penalties for discrimination violations against supplier family members?" Section 23A specifies immediate contract review with potential termination for documented discrimination. Section 15B allows service suspension pending investigation. Combined, these could halt Mitchell Technologies' support for United's entire fleet. The implications hit the cabin like decompression at altitude. Halted technology support meant grounded aircraft, canceled flights, stranded passengers, and financial losses that could bankrupt airlines within weeks. Dr. Park looked up from laptop documentation. "This has evolved from individual discrimination to institutional failure, with corporate consequences that will be studied in business schools for decades." Janet Cross was hyperventilating. Slightly authority completely evaporated. What started as routine passenger management had become a conference call with technology executives discussing contract termination that could destroy United Airlines. But Marcus wasn't finished establishing the scope of United's vulnerability. "Jonathan, please conference in David Chen from our aerospace division." A new voice joined, professional and matter-of-fact. "Mr. Mitchell, this is David. I'm reviewing United's dependency on our systems. They currently operate 0 backup platforms for entertainment booking or maintenance tracking. Service interruption would ground their entire fleet within 72 hours. Elena whispered to her audience, now over 38,000 viewers. This man just explained how he can shut down United Airlines completely. These flight attendants discriminated against the wrong person's wife. Sarah Chen addressed crew members directly. "As an attorney, you're now facing potential federal civil rights charges, breach of contract penalties, and personal liability for triggering massive corporate losses." Rachel Palmer remained in denial, despite overwhelming evidence of catastrophic error. "They're just trying to scare us with corporate threats." "We followed proper procedures for managing difficult passengers." The statement demonstrated institutional bias blindness that would trigger congressional investigations and industry-wide reforms. Marcus's voice carried quiet authority of someone who'd built a technology empire and had no patience for discrimination against his family. "Let me be very clear about what happens next. My wife was assaulted financially, intimidated, and threatened with removal by United employees. This is documented, witnessed, and legally actionable." He paused, allowing implications to settle over the cabin like fog. "United Airlines has 60 seconds to provide resolution demonstrating understanding of this situation's severity, or I begin contract termination procedures that will ground your entire fleet and cost you approximately $400 million in immediate losses." The countdown had begun. Elena Rodriguez's live stream had reached 42,000 viewers, with content spreading across every major social media platform simultaneously. Major news outlets were reporting the developing story in real time, and #UA892 discrimination was trending worldwide alongside @Mitchell Technologies and #Airline Justice. Janet Cross felt 22 years in aviation crushing her shoulders. Her voice cracked. "Mr. Mitchell, why? We can discuss this through proper corporate channels." Perhaps there were miscommunications we can resolve professionally. Marcus's response was swift and unforgiving. Miscommunications. Your crew deliberately poured juice on my wife, demanded she pay for damage they caused, threatened her with removal, and escalated conflict when she contacted our legal team. These aren't miscommunications. They're civil rights violations. Dr. James Park looked up from comprehensive documentation. Mr. Mitchell, as an academic researcher. I've been taking detailed notes on this incident. The crew's behavior demonstrates institutional bias patterns, suggesting training failures rather than individual errors. Thank you, Dr. Park. Jonathan, please add Dr. Park's academic documentation to our legal file. His research credentials will be valuable for federal discrimination proceedings. The casual mention of federal proceedings sent panic through crew members. Federal discrimination cases meant FBI investigations, congressional oversight, and career-ending publicity. Mike Thompson was on three-way call with United's crisis management team and CEO office. Sir, you need personal intervention on this flight immediately. The passenger's husband controls technology systems critical to our operations, and he's threatening contract termination that would ground our entire fleet. United's CEO voice came through Mike's phone, with controlled panic of someone realizing his company faced existential threat. Get me direct line to this flight immediately. We need damage control before this destroys us. Rachel Palmer remained in denial, despite overwhelming evidence of corporate disaster. Janet, we can't let them intimidate us just because they claim business connections. If we back down, every passenger will try to manipulate us. Sarah Chen addressed Rachel directly. As a practicing lawyer, I need to inform you that denying obvious evidence of corporate connections while maintaining discriminatory behavior could result in personal criminal charges under federal civil rights law. Elena whispered to her audience, 45,000 viewers watching this flight attendant still not believe she discriminated against a tech billionaire's wife. The denial is incredible. Marcus continued building his case with methodical precision. David, please explain to everyone the operational impact of Mitchell Technologies' service suspension. David Chen's voice came through with technical authority. United operates 847 aircraft with Mitchell Technologies Entertainment Systems. Their booking platform processes 2.1 million reservations monthly through our software. Maintenance tracking prevents aircraft groundings through our applications. Service interruption would halt operations within 72 hours. The numbers hit the cabin like individual explosions. 847 grounded aircraft meant hundreds of thousands of stranded passengers, millions in daily losses, and potential corporate bankruptcy within weeks. Dr. Park saved documentation and addressed the broader situation. This incident demonstrates how individual bias can trigger institutional collapse. The crew's inability to recognize error, despite obvious warning signs, suggests endemic training failures. Janet made one final desperate attempt to maintain control. Mr. Mitchell, we appreciate your business relationship with United, but crew authority during flight operations is established by federal regulations. We have procedures for passenger disputes that don't involve corporate intervention. The statement revealed complete failure to understand the situation's severity and would later be used in sensitivity training programs as example of institutional bias, blindness. Marcus's response was delivered with quiet finality of judge pronouncing sentence, Janet Cross and Rachel Palmer. You are terminated from United Airlines employment, effective immediately. Your actions have created massive liability exposure and violated contractual obligations with Mitchell Technologies. Elena's live stream exploded. 48,000 plus viewers just watched a tech billionaire fire airline employees in real time. This is unprecedented corporate justice. Comments moved too fast to read. Justice served. They got fired on live TV. Never discriminate again. Amanda Richardson's voice joined with legal precision. Mr. Mitchell, I'm documenting the terminations for contract compliance file. United has demonstrated swift response to discrimination violations, which may mitigate contract penalties. But Marcus wasn't finished establishing consequences. Jonathan, please conference in Rebecca Williams from our media relations team. A new voice joined, professional and strategic, Mr. Mitchell. I've been monitoring social media coverage. The incident has reached viral threshold with over 300,000 social media mentions in the past 2 hours. Major news outlets are requesting statements about United discrimination and your company's response. Sarah Chen recognized strategic communication framework being established. Marcus was creating public record that would prevent United from minimizing or denying the discrimination incident. Mike Thompson received update from United's crisis team. The CEO wants to personally apologize to Mr. Mitchell and establish immediate policy changes to prevent similar incidents. Janet Cross and Rachel Palmer stood in the aisle. Careers ended, professional reputations, destroyed actions documented for posterity by thousands of witnesses and multiple recording devices. Dr. Park addressed broader implications. This incident will become case study in how individual discrimination triggers corporate consequences. The crew's escalation, despite obvious warnings, demonstrates institutional bias requiring reform. Elena concluded her live stream with 52,000 viewers. Y'all just witnessed the most expensive discrimination case in airline history. A tech billionaire's wife was discriminated against by employees of a company depending on her husband's technology. Justice was served in real time. Marcus's final statement was delivered with authority of someone who just demonstrated the power of economic consequences for discrimination. This incident will trigger industry-wide policy changes to ensure no passenger ever faces similar treatment. Discrimination doesn't just hurt individuals, it destroys institutions that enable it. The cabin fell silent except for engine noise and quiet sound of passengers processing what they'd witnessed. 2 careers had ended, corporate contracts had been threatened, and the airline industry had received a lesson in discrimination's cost that would reshape policies for decades. The story was far from over, but immediate justice had been delivered at 35,000 feet. The Boeing 777 continued toward Miami, but the first-class cabin's atmosphere had fundamentally transformed. What began as routine discrimination had evolved into corporate justice, delivered in real time before an audience of over 55,000 live-stream viewers and millions following across social media. Janet Cross and Rachel Palmer stood in the aisle, their airline careers effectively ended by their own documented actions. The bias they'd practiced and escalated had triggered consequences reshaping the entire aviation industry. Marcus Mitchell's voice continued through Simone's phone with methodical precision of someone implementing corporate justice. Rebecca, please issue a statement explaining that Mitchell Technologies takes discrimination against any passenger seriously, particularly when involving bias by employees of our business partners. Rebecca Williams responded with strategic clarity. Mr. Mitchell, the statement will emphasize that technology companies have leverage to enforce civil rights standards through contractual obligations. This sets precedent for corporate accountability in discrimination cases. Elena Rodriguez addressed her live stream audience, now over 58,000 viewers. We just witnessed how economic power can be used for social justice. This tech CEO didn't just fire the discriminatory employees, he's creating change. Her comment section was exploding with reactions from viewers worldwide, but the tone had shifted from outrage to admiration for the systematic approach to justice. Dr. James Park looked up from his comprehensive documentation. This incident demonstrates how individual courage, combined with institutional power, can transform discriminatory systems. The crew's inability to recognize their error despite obvious warnings suggests the need for industry-wide reform. Sarah Chen was typing rapidly on her tablet, documenting legal precedents being established in real time. This case will be studied in law schools for decades. It demonstrates how discrimination victims with economic leverage can achieve immediate justice rather than waiting years for court proceedings. But Marcus wasn't simply seeking punishment. He was implementing systematic change. Mike Thompson received direct call from United Airlines CEO Mike. "We're implementing immediate policy changes and want to personally apologize to Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell. We're establishing a discrimination prevention fund and partnering with civil rights organizations for mandatory training." The speed of corporate response demonstrated how quickly institutions could change when faced with existential economic pressure, but also how slowly they moved without such pressure. Marcus continued establishing consequences. "David, please begin implementing the new policy framework we discussed for all airline partners. Every Mitchell Technologies contract will now include mandatory discrimination prevention clauses with automatic termination provisions." David Chen responded with technical precision. "The new framework requires airlines to implement bias training, establish independent reporting systems, and maintain zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. Violations trigger immediate contract review and potential service suspension." Amanda Richardson added legal context. "These contractual changes will affect 17 major airlines, representing approximately 73% of domestic flight operations. The industry will be forced to adopt discrimination prevention or face technology service termination." The implications were staggering, but also carefully calibrated. Marcus was using market position to force industry-wide civil rights reforms that would protect millions of passengers from discriminatory treatment. Elena whispered to her live stream, "This man just changed airline policy for the entire country because employees discriminated against his wife." Corporate power used for social justice is incredible to witness. Simone Mitchell, who had remained composed throughout the confrontation, finally spoke to the broader situation. "I want everyone to understand. This isn't about revenge or individual punishment. It's about creating systems, protecting all passengers from discriminatory treatment, regardless of their economic status or business connections." Her words demonstrated the principled leadership that transforms individual incidents into social progress. Dr. Park addressed the educational implications. Dr. Mitchell's approach represents restorative rather than punitive justice. "The goal is change that prevents future discrimination rather than simply punishing individuals who practiced bias." But the transformation was just beginning. Jonathan. Please conference in Senator Patricia Williams from the Transportation Committee. She's been working on airline passenger rights legislation. A new voice joined the call, carrying federal oversight authority. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been monitoring this situation through social media coverage. The Transportation Committee is prepared to fast-track passenger rights legislation that includes discrimination prevention requirements for all airline operations." Elena's live stream audience climbed past 62,000 viewers as federal legislation was being discussed in response to the discrimination incident they'd witnessed in real time. Sarah Chen recognized the historical significance developing. "This incident is triggering immediate corporate policy changes, industry-wide reform, and federal legislative action. The speed of response is unprecedented in civil rights enforcement." Janet Cross and Rachel Palmer remained silent, their terminated careers serving as examples of how individual bias could trigger personal and institutional consequences. Their discrimination had created a case study that would be used in sensitivity training programs for decades. Mike Thompson provided updates from United's crisis response. The CEO has established a $25 million discrimination prevention fund, implemented mandatory bias training for all employees, and created an independent oversight board, including civil rights organizations. The financial commitment demonstrated how quickly corporations could find resources for civil rights compliance when faced with threats to operations, but also revealed how little they invested without such pressure. Marcus delivered his systematic consequence. This incident will establish the Mitchell Protocol, a framework for using economic leverage to enforce civil rights standards in business relationships. Other technology companies will be encouraged to adopt similar contractual requirements. The Mitchell Protocol would become the gold standard for corporate civil rights enforcement, demonstrating how market leaders could use influence to eliminate discriminatory practices throughout entire industries. However, the changes weren't happening in a vacuum. Other passengers on the flight were also being transformed by what they'd witnessed. The elderly couple in 3A, initially uncomfortable with the confrontation, approached Simone during the remaining flight. "We want to apologize for not speaking up sooner," the husband said quietly. "We saw what was happening, but didn't want to get involved. We realize now that silence enables discrimination." The businessman in 1B, who'd received preferential service throughout the flight, also approached. "I've been flying first class for 20 years and never noticed the service differences until today. This has been a wake-up call about my own privilege and responsibility to speak up." These individual transformations were as important as the corporate changes. Discrimination thrived in environments where bystanders remained silent, and the incident had demonstrated the power of witness testimony and documentation. Elena concluded her live stream with 65,000 viewers. "We just documented how change happens in the modern era. Real-time accountability, economic leverage, and principled leadership can transform discrimination into justice." The Boeing 777 continued toward Miami, but the passengers on board had witnessed unprecedented transformation. Individual discrimination had triggered corporate accountability, industry reform, and federal legislative action. The aviation industry, technology sector, and civil rights enforcement had been permanently changed by what began as routine bias against a passenger who refused to accept unequal treatment. But the most important change was cultural. The demonstration that discrimination carried immediate, serious, and permanent consequences when victims had power and allies willing to document and amplify injustice. As Flight 892 began its descent toward Miami International Airport, the reverberations of documented discrimination and immediate corporate response were already transforming the aviation industry. Elena Rodriguez's live stream had peaked at 68,000 concurrent viewers, with her real-time documentation being shared across platforms worldwide. Major news outlets were broadcasting breaking coverage about the incident, but the story's power lay in its immediate consequences rather than delayed institutional response. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC were all leading with variations of tech executives' wife faces, airline discrimination, husband's company, responds with swift action. Dr. James Park was finalizing his comprehensive documentation, creating what would become the most detailed real-time study of discrimination and corporate response ever recorded. This incident will be required reading in business schools, law schools, and civil rights programs, he explained to passengers around him, not just for the discrimination, but for the immediate systematic response. His research had already been contacted by 3 major universities requesting access to his documentation for case study development. Sarah Chen had compiled over 30 pages of legal notes documenting new precedents for using economic leverage to achieve civil rights enforcement. This case establishes frameworks for discrimination victims with institutional power, she explained. Instead of waiting years for court justice, systematic change was implemented within hours. The Civil Rights Technology Initiative she would later establish had already received its first funding commitment from Mitchell Technologies itself, creating a $10 million fund to help other discrimination victims leverage economic pressure for immediate change. Mike Thompson received continuous updates from United Airlines Crisis Management about industry-wide responses. Every major airline is reviewing discrimination prevention protocols, he announced. American Delta, Southwest, and JetBlue are all implementing emergency training programs and oversight mechanisms. The speed of industry response demonstrated how quickly systematic change could occur when corporate leaders realized discrimination created existential business risks, but also how little preventive action they'd taken without such pressure. Marcus Mitchell's voice continued through Simone's phone as he coordinated broader transformation. Senator Williams, the Transportation Committee's passenger rights legislation should include technology supplier oversight of airline discrimination prevention. Companies like Mitchell Technologies can provide monitoring that government agencies cannot achieve alone. Senator Patricia Williams responded with legislative precision, Mr. Mitchell, we're fast-tracking the Airline Passenger Dignity Act, which will require technology suppliers to monitor and report discriminatory practices by airline partners. Your documentation provides the evidentiary foundation we need. Elena whispered to her audience, now following post-live stream coverage. Federal legislation is being triggered by what we witnessed. This discrimination case is creating laws protecting millions of passengers. But the changes weren't limited to aviation. The Mitchell Protocol was being adapted across industries. Amanda Richardson provided updates. Mitchell Technologies is receiving calls from civil rights organizations requesting partnership in discrimination monitoring. The NAACP, ACLU, and Urban League all want to collaborate on technology-based bias prevention systems. The incident was creating unprecedented cooperation between technology companies and civil rights organizations, establishing new models for systematic discrimination prevention that extended far beyond airline passenger treatment. Dr. Park addressed the academic implications. This case study demonstrates how real-time documentation, combined with economic leverage, can achieve immediate social justice. Traditional discrimination cases take years to resolve through courts, but this incident created systematic change within hours. His preliminary analysis was already being requested by Harvard Business School, Stanford Graduate School of Business, and Yale Law School for immediate integration into their curriculum. Rebecca Williams provided social media analysis. The incident has generated over 1.8 million social media mentions in the past 4 hours. #Mitchell Protocol is trending worldwide as other technology leaders pledge to adopt similar discrimination prevention requirements. The viral documentation was creating global conversations about corporate responsibility for civil rights enforcement that extended far beyond the aviation industry. Mike Thompson announced additional industry responses. Airline stocks are moving based on discrimination prevention ratings. Investors are demanding oversight mechanisms and bias training programs. Companies with stronger civil rights records are seeing stock price increases. Financial markets were pricing discrimination risk into airline valuations, creating immediate economic incentives for bias prevention that would have taken years to develop through regulatory pressure alone. Marcus continued coordinating systematic reform. David, please begin implementing Mitchell Protocol requirements for all technology suppliers. We're encouraging Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple to adopt similar contractual discrimination prevention clauses. The expansion of discrimination prevention requirements across the technology industry would create systematic pressure for civil rights compliance throughout the American economy, market-based enforcement that complemented rather than replaced government oversight. Elena provided real-time social media analysis. Major travel influencers, civil rights leaders, and business executives are sharing this story. The documentation of discrimination and immediate corporate justice is inspiring similar accountability demands across industries. The incident was becoming a template for how discrimination victims could leverage economic relationships to achieve immediate systematic change rather than waiting for slow institutional responses. Senator Williams announced legislative progress. The Transportation Committee is scheduling hearings on airline discrimination next week. Mr. Mitchell, we'll need your testimony about how technology companies can systematically monitor and prevent discriminatory practices. Federal legislative response was occurring at unprecedented speed because of the real-time documentation and immediate consequences viewers had witnessed, but it was building on the corporate changes rather than creating them. Sarah Chen explained the legal precedents being established. This incident creates new frameworks for discrimination enforcement. Victims with economic leverage can achieve immediate systematic change rather than waiting for judicial processes. Other cases will reference these methods. The legal implications extended beyond aviation into systematic civil rights enforcement across multiple industries, but the key innovation was speed, immediate consequences, rather than delayed justice. Dr. Park concluded his documentation. This case demonstrates how individual courage, real-time documentation, economic leverage, and principled leadership can combine to create immediate social change. The methodology will be studied and replicated. But the most significant transformation was cultural rather than institutional. As Flight 892 approached Miami, passengers realized they had witnessed and participated in a new model of accountability. Individual discrimination had triggered immediate corporate response, industry reform, federal attention, and global conversations about systematic bias prevention. The traditional cycle of discrimination, incident, complaint, investigation, delayed consequences, minimal change had been replaced by immediate accountability, systematic response, and preventive transformation. Elena Rodriguez concluded her coverage. We documented how systematic change happens in the digital age. Real-time accountability, economic leverage, and principled leadership can transform discrimination into immediate justice. The Boeing 777 touched down in Miami, but the transformation it carried would reshape American civil rights enforcement for generations. The aviation industry had achieved its lowest discrimination complaint rates in history within weeks of the incident. Technology companies were implementing similar protocols across their business relationships. Federal legislation was fast-tracking based on the documented evidence. But perhaps most importantly, the incident had demonstrated that discrimination carried immediate, serious, and permanent consequences when victims had power allies and the courage to demand change. The flight had ended, but the journey toward comprehensive civil rights protection was just beginning. Powered by the precedent that bias would no longer be tolerated, minimized, or ignored when accountability was immediate and consequences were real. 6 months later, Elena Rodriguez stood before the National Press Club podium in Washington, D.C., addressing an audience of journalists, civil rights leaders, and technology executives. Her documentary, 35,000 Feet Real-Time Justice in the Digital Age, had earned Emmy nominations and transformed her from travel blogger to leading voice in accountability journalism. The power of immediate documentation cannot be overstated, she told the audience. When discrimination happens with instant consequences, it creates accountability that traditional reporting struggles to match. That live stream with 68,000 viewers generated more systematic change than decades of delayed discrimination lawsuits. But her success came with sobering recognition of how rarely victims had the resources Simone Mitchell possessed. The documentary had become required viewing in journalism schools and civil rights programs, but it also sparked uncomfortable conversations about justice, inequality, how economic power determined speed of accountability. Dr. James Park published his study, From Individual Bias to Systematic Reform, Real-Time Accountability in Corporate Discrimination, in Harvard Business Review, where it became the most downloaded article in publication history. His documentation provided academic foundation for understanding how immediate consequences could transform institutional behavior. The crew members' escalation, despite obvious warning signs, revealed institutional bias, training failures, he explained during his TED Talk, which reached 2.8 million views. They couldn't recognize their error because their systems normalize discriminatory behavior. The Mitchell incident exposed these failures and forced comprehensive reform. His research had triggered bias training reviews across multiple industries, but it also revealed how reactive, rather than proactive, most corporate civil rights efforts remained. Sarah Chen established the Economic Justice Initiative, a nonprofit helping discrimination victims identify economic leverage points for achieving immediate change. Her legal documentation of Flight 892 provided templates for connecting bias incidents to business consequences. Traditional discrimination lawsuits take an average of 3.2 years to resolve, she explained to Senate Judiciary Committee hearings. The Mitchell Protocol achieved systematic reform within hours by using economic leverage and real-time documentation. We've helped 312 similar cases achieve immediate resolution using these methods. But the initiative also documented how few discrimination victims had access to economic pressure points, highlighting ongoing inequalities in civil rights enforcement. Mike Thompson was promoted to Chief Ethics Officer at United Airlines, where he implemented the industry's most comprehensive discrimination prevention system. His first-hand experience witnessing Flight 892 made him a leading expert in crisis prevention and civil rights compliance. The Mitchell incident cost United approximately $47 million in immediate response measures training programs, oversight systems, legal settlements, and policy implementations, he testified before Congress. But it prevented potentially hundreds of millions in long-term losses by establishing discrimination prevention that eliminated future liability. United had become the industry leader in passenger rights protection, with discrimination complaints dropping 87% and customer satisfaction reaching industry highs. However, critics noted that meaningful change required crisis rather than proactive leadership. The Mitchell Protocol had been adopted by technology companies across industries. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple implemented similar contractual requirements for discrimination prevention in business relationships. The systematic pressure forced civil rights compliance across American corporate operations. Marcus Mitchell testified before the Senate Transportation Committee about broader implications. When technology companies use market leverage to eliminate discrimination, we create accountability that government regulation alone cannot achieve. Private sector enforcement can complement federal oversight more efficiently than either approach alone. His testimony influenced the Airline Passenger Dignity Act, which required technology suppliers to monitor and report discriminatory practices by business partners. However, the legislation also revealed how corporate influence could either advance or impede civil rights progress, depending on executive priorities. Dr. Simone Mitchell established the Dignity in Transit Foundation, providing legal support, documentation resources, and economic advocacy for transportation discrimination victims. The foundation had processed over 4,200 complaints and achieved systematic changes at airlines, bus companies, taxi services, and ride-sharing platforms. Individual discrimination incidents reveal institutional failures, she explained during her National Medical Association keynote. When we respond with comprehensive reform, rather than individual punishment, we create lasting change, protecting everyone. But the foundation's work also highlighted persistent inequalities, how economic status, documentation ability, and social media access determined which discrimination victims could achieve immediate justice. Janet Cross and Rachel Palmer had completed comprehensive bias training and were working with civil rights organizations to prevent similar incidents. Their experiences as terminated employees became case studies in how individual prejudice could trigger career-ending consequences. I destroyed my career and hurt an innocent person because I couldn't recognize my own bias, Janet told audiences during sensitivity training sessions. Dr. Mitchell chose education over revenge, giving me a chance to help prevent others from making similar mistakes. Their redemption stories were powerful, but they also represented privilege. Many discrimination perpetrators faced harsher consequences without opportunities for rehabilitation and education. Federal legislation triggered by Flight 892 had transformed transportation civil rights enforcement. The Airline Passenger Dignity Act established mandatory reporting systems, independent oversight mechanisms, and technology-based monitoring that reduced discrimination complaints across transportation sectors by 54%. The Mitchell Protocol had been adapted for healthcare bias, housing discrimination, employment prejudice, and education inequality. Technology companies were using market leverage to enforce civil rights standards throughout American economic systems. Elena Rodriguez received Pulitzer Prize recognition for her real-time discrimination documentation. Her live stream methodology had been adopted by journalists worldwide, creating frameworks for immediate accountability that bypassed traditional media gatekeeping. The future of civil rights enforcement lies in real-time documentation, economic leverage, and immediate systematic response, she concluded during her National Association of Black Journalists acceptance speech. When discrimination has instant consequences, institutions change behavior permanently. But her success also highlighted digital divides, how technology access and social media literacy determined which victims could leverage immediate accountability. The aviation industry achieved historically low discrimination complaint rates. Airlines competed on civil rights protection as market differentiator, with bias prevention becoming key factors in consumer choice and investor decisions. Dr. Park's follow-up research documented bias reduction across industries adopting Mitchell Protocol requirements. The Flight 892 incident created ripple effects, eliminating discriminatory practices far beyond aviation, his research concluded. Individual courage combined with systematic accountability can transform entire economic sectors. However, his research also revealed concerning patterns, how economic pressure achieved faster change than moral arguments, raising questions about civil rights, progress dependent on market forces rather than ethical principles. The Boeing 777 that carried Flight 892 was displayed at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, with Elena's live-stream documentation playing on permanent loop. The exhibit attracted millions of visitors, learning about how individual courage and immediate accountability could create systematic social change. The exhibit placard read, "Flight 892, demonstrated how real-time documentation, economic leverage, and principled leadership could combine to create immediate civil rights enforcement." The incident transformed the aviation industry and established new frameworks for corporate accountability that protected millions of Americans from discriminatory treatment. But museum visitors also learned about ongoing challenges, how justice speed remained linked to victim resources, how corporate civil rights progress depended on executive priorities, how systematic change required both individual courage and institutional power. The transformation continued expanding. Each month brought new examples of discrimination victims using Mitchell Protocol methods to achieve systematic change. Technology companies extended civil rights requirements to international operations. Federal agencies adopted real-time monitoring systems based on Flight 892 documentation. Students in schools learned about Dr. Simone Mitchell as an example of how individual courage could create systematic change, but they also learned about ongoing inequalities in civil rights access and enforcement. The incident proved that discrimination could be eliminated through immediate accountability, economic consequences, and comprehensive institutional reform. The methodology developed during that flight had become the gold standard for civil rights enforcement in the digital age. Individual courage had created systematic transformation, protecting millions from the discrimination Dr. Simone Mitchell faced at 35,000 feet. The flight had ended, but the journey toward comprehensive civil rights protection continued, powered by the precedent that discrimination would no longer be tolerated, when victims had tools and determination to demand immediate change, while acknowledging that true justice required expanding those tools and opportunities to all Americans, regardless of economic status or institutional power. This story represents more than just one incident on one flight. It represents the power of courage, documentation, and accountability in creating lasting change. Dr. Simone Mitchell's experience shows us that when we refuse to accept discrimination, and when we have the tools to demand immediate justice, transformation is possible. But this transformation requires all of us. It requires witnesses who speak up, bystanders, who document injustice, allies, who amplify voices, and victims who refuse to remain silent. If this story moved you, if it made you think about discrimination differently, if it inspired you to be part of the solution, then please share it. Hit that like button to help others find this important message. Subscribe to this channel to stay informed about stories of courage and change that are shaping our world. Most importantly, take action in your own life. When you witness discrimination, document it. When you see injustice, speak up. When you have power, use it to protect those who don't. Because change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when ordinary people, like Dr. Simone Mitchell, like Elena Rodriguez, like Dr. Park and Sarah Chen, decide that discrimination stops with them. Share this story with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Let them know that in the digital age, accountability can be immediate, consequences can be swift, and justice can be real-time. Together we can create a world where no one has to choose between dignity and traveling, where economic status doesn't determine access to justice, and where discrimination truly carries the immediate consequences it deserves. Subscribe, like, share, and most importantly, act. Because the next story of courage and transformation could be yours.